Oh, yeah. He came armed and ready to go, especially if you came at him with a questionable type question.
Yeah, he seemed a little annoyed today with some of the questioning, but I thought he tackled especially the LeSean McCoy stuff pretty head-on. And, I don't know where that went or where it's gone, but I think it's behind him now. I think Chip Kelly did a pretty good job of answering those questions and tackling them head-on.
Yeah, I agree. And, I was always in the camp where I didn't think he needed to put out a release or a statement or respond to it at the time, because sometimes, and especially in politics, when you respond to accusations that groundless and baseless, it's almost like there is some type of an admission in there, whether you intended that or not. So by just ignoring it and then tackling it when it's asked in a live press conference and being very strong in his convictions that he makes up a team without color in mind, and he doesn't let other people's opinions govern his choices in life. That pretty much was Chip Kelly to a T right there. I mean, he's made statements like that about a lot of things that he does. So I agree with you. I think he handled it the way it should have been handled.
Yeah, and I don't want to get a whole heck of a lot in that because I don't think there was a lot of basis behind McCoy, but I will ask you this question. How much of McCoy's statements do you believe centers around the Cooper situation of 2 years ago?
Well, I think that the Cooper situation opened the door to use it against Chip. I don't know if LeSean McCoy really believes that there's a racial bias in Chip Kelly's roster assembly, but I think he capitalized on that opportunity to take a shot at Chip because he's disappointed by being traded, if that makes sense. Again, I think the talk from LeSean is more out of emotion than it is out of fact.
Yeah, and I believe that it was you who asked him as a follow-up. There's more than just LeSean McCoy who's made these insinuations. Right. And can you kind of tell the people what Chip said in response to your question and how you felt with that answer?
Well, I asked him two questions, Mike, because the first thing I asked him did center on Cooper. When the Cooper incident went down, Chip said that Riley needed to understand that words hurt, or that everybody needs to understand that words do hurt. So just because you said something and apologized doesn't make it all the better the next day. People, have feelings, and this affects their livelihoods. So I threw that back at Chip saying, right now you said it doesn't bother you, but, 2 years ago you said words do hurt. So why doesn't this hurt you? And then that's when he went in saying that he personally is not someone who takes others' criticisms and allows those criticisms to govern over him and control what he does, and he does not care about perceptions in that regard. So I think it was valid. I think it was Tim McManus who brought up, don't you think it's important what perceptions of your program are, because you are one of 32 coaches, you try to get players in free agency like everyone else, and that is valid. Even if you are not in agreement with LeSean McCoy, but that other people think that way about you, it can affect how you go about your work. But, Chip said he understood that, but that he's still not going to let that perception necessarily influence what he does. I think he said he would wind up talking to some of the players in his locker room, but he has had players already come out, especially Malcolm Jenkins, come out and speak in his defense. So Chip has basically said no one else has really brought this up to me and has made it an issue.
Geoff Mosher, CSNPhilly.com, at Geoff Mosher, CSN on Twitter. Chip Kelly said Sam Bradford, Earl Wolf, the only guys limited so far. What's Bradford's schedule of events coming up? Are we going to see him perform at all in the next round of OTAs? Are we going to have to wait till maybe the mini camps, or are we going to have to wait all the way to training camp to see Sam?
No, not that long. Chip said next week Sam will be able to throw in 7-on-7s. Very interesting today, when they started 7-on-7s, their first round of it was something I haven't seen before, and that's basically the wide receivers ran their routes against the corners, but the front, the middle interior D and people didn't really do much. It's almost like they just stayed huddled at the center. So, and Sam Bradford actually went out and took snaps and just didn't throw the ball. So he was just getting simulation snapping in a 7-on-7. So, and then he would go and do some throwing on the side when they did the real 7-on-7s. But they said next week we'll get him to do. He'll be able to do 7-on-7s. Sam said he felt good. He feels like he's on track. He'd made no predictions or declarations. He understands that you just can't say, yes, I'll definitely be ready this day, because you just don't know what happens. But he seems to feel that he's on good track.
What do you see from Sam? I mean, is it a guy who looks like he's moving around pretty well? Is he still gingerly walking, limping, or does it look like a guy who's just itching to kind of get back out on the field?
Well, I think one thing that stood out, Mike, is looking at him, and I've never really seen him live and in person before. Don't really remember being very close a couple of years ago when they opened up against St. Louis. But he has really thin legs, almost chicken leg type guy. And I don't know if that's the way he's always been built or if that's because he's been rehabbing a knee for, the better part of 2 years and really hasn't had a chance to do a whole lot of weight lifting with the legs or pressing or whatever NFL athletes and especially quarterbacks do to keep their leg strength up. So when you look at him, you kind of see toothpicks to his legs, and that's always kind of alarming, especially at the quarterback position when you take hits. Almost reminds me of the way Todd Pinkston looked as a wide receiver, and you always worried about his durability for that. So that's just one thing that stood out to me. As far as when he's on the side throwing the ball, the zip is there, looks fine. People have talked about being really impressed by his arm strength. I know Jason Kelsey said he's already sat in the room with Sam Bradford and gone through protections and breaking down other defenses, and Sam has come off as very wise, very smart, understood student of the game. So we'll see.
Geoff, obviously that's a big spot. How about Sanchez? I know that we had talked on Tuesday's show about his arm strength and whether or not he's further along after that shoulder surgery. Yeah. Any more evidence that he could be, experiencing better health with that shoulder?
Mike, sometimes when I'm onto something, I'm onto something. So I asked him about that today. And he said, I said, how do you feel this year compared to last year at this time when you hadn't played in a year and you had a surgically repaired shoulder? And he said, man, I've been watching tape of last year's camp and watching some of the throws, and you see the pattern develop, and you see the out route there, or you see the fly pattern, and then then you see the ball kind of floating in instead of being zipped in there, and you realize you were leaving some plays out on the field. And he said, he probably didn't realize it at the time, but the zip on his fastball just wasn't there. And then he kind of went into talking about in the season where he played fairly well by his standards and improved his accuracy, and even made a joke about improving it despite having a crappy arm. And then here was the statement of all statements. He basically said, if I make some better plays there and things happen, we win a game, we make the playoffs, it's a totally different story. And I don't think he meant a totally different story about the 2014 season. I think he means a totally different story about this year, the acquisition of Sam Bradford, who's the starting quarterback. In his mind, he really believes that cost him an opportunity to go ahead and be the long-term starter for this team.
Yeah, and that's interesting because he kind of has also insinuated that this could be an open competition, and most people don't think that's a possibility. But if he's that much further along in terms of the playbook and in health, do you think that Sanchez has a shot then to be the starter?
I think he would have to be a lot further along, Mike, and I can't get past the idea that Chip Kelly gave up a second-round pick along with Nick Foles to get Sam Bradford and really went out of his way to talk about all the research he did in acquiring Sam Bradford and the similarities to the style of offense that Oklahoma has. I mean, I really do think Chip envisions Sam Bradford as a starter if healthy, but like you said, if there's some problem where Sam can't get on the field or he can't move as well as he can move and he can't grasp the offense because of that, then you really would have to start to think of Mark Sanchez as opening the season as your starter with the ability to then take control of that job. But we are a long way from there, my friend.
All right. How about Tebow and Barkley? We know Barkley doesn't have the greatest arm either. Tebow has been criticized for his throwing. Do we see a legitimate possibility for a QB competition at the number 3 spot, or is Tebow just too far away?
Well, I mean, Chip has said there is competition, so I'm going to believe him. There's competition. There's no reason to believe that Matt Barkley is hammered down the number 3 job. He hasn't played very much here. He doesn't seem like a realistic option going forward. Usually when you have a young number 3 quarterback, you have some kind of plan for him to either be your primary backup going forward, if not your starter in a year or two if he's a project. But I don't see that with Matt Barkley. We know they've tried to kill him. If anything, if Matt Barkley is on a team and plays really well throughout the preseason, there's a chance they could deal him if they're comfortable with Tim Tebow as the number 3 quarterback. And I've said this before, I do believe that it can't just be about Tim's versatility. He has to show that he can lead an offense like a quarterback. He has to be a good passer across the middle. read the defense, and do everything that quarterbacks do to win that job over Barkley. It can't just be because he's still a really good athlete.
Chip did say today that he is only being viewed as a quarterback. He's not playing other positions. Have you guys got a chance to see him throw at all? Does he look like an improved thrower?
Well, I mean, I saw him throw, in 7-on-7s, and I think he has a good arm. I don't think Tebow's arm was ever the question. Like, if you remember the playoff game that he won against Pittsburgh, he makes throws down the sidelines really well. He has arm strength. It's always been with him across the middle with accuracy and a touch that's really held him back. And honestly, we're not going to get a good gauge on that until training camp in the preseason. But the arm strength is there for a guy who hasn't played in 2 years. I'm sure, we'll have to see how the athleticism is. But, again, we're a long way from any real evaluation of Tim Tebow. But, yes, he does throw the ball down the sides and deep fairly well.
Right, and one guy, G.J. Kinney, who was a quarterback, and he has now moved to wide receiver, so that's one less guy that's in the mix at the quarterback position. Geoff Mosher's with us. The Eagles at their OTAs. They finished today. They'll be back on Monday. What was Chip's thoughts on the new extra point rules? I know that they proposed something, and a lot of people had said, well, they made the change. I didn't think there was any reason to make the change to do what they did. I don't think there was much of a change. It sounds like Chip was not all that, I don't want to say thrilled, but just didn't really think that this was doing much to change the game either.
Yeah, he went out of his way to mention that Cody Parkey his kickers, I think in general, his kickers the last 2 years, so Parkey and Henry, were 96% conversion rate from the 15-yard line and in. So if that's the case, and he said that it doesn't really entice you to want to go for two that much more when you pretty much still have an automatic one that you can put on the board. I mean, I don't know what the percentages is of teams going for two. I guarantee you it's not 96% success rate. So I think Chip kind of agrees with you that this was kind of a ho-hum rule change that doesn't really impact the game. That being said, Chip. So things are going. I can definitely see him occasionally trying to catch a defense napping or try to go for two, in an unconventional time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, the rule, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You're making a team kick a field goal for 1 point from 33 yards out, whereas if your drive gets stalled on the 2-yard line, you're getting 3 points for a 19-yard field goal attempt. It just doesn't seem like there's a lot of sense behind why. It seems like they just changed. I think what Kelly was saying was my proposal, if you put it on the 1, yes, I'm going to think about changing my strategy. And now I'm just going right off the card still. So I kind of agree with him.
And I agree.
Yeah.
I totally was in favor of Chip's proposition. I do think if they moved it to 1, it would have invited a lot more teams to go for it.
How about we know Mathis is not here. Most people thought Barbary would be playing right guard because Harriman's is gone. But Chip today said that Barbary's playing left guard. Does that maybe open the door for the feeling that Mathis might not be back?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I talked to Jason Kelsey about that after practice today. I said, I don't understand the sense of Barbary playing left guard when he's probably going to have to play right guard, assuming Mathis is back. And what Kelsey's response was, as a team, we kind of assume that Evan Mathis is going to be back, but you really have to prepare for every scenario, and which is true. What if Evan isn't back? So honestly, watching Barbary at left guard, and Allen has told me in the past that he is more comfortable on the left side. He feels like it doesn't matter whether you put him at tackle or guard. He's just better he feels more comfortable on the left side. So A, you're catering to a guy's strengths, and B, you're preparing for the future. And I know I've said this to you before, even though the penalties for holdouts are steep, and there's really it's hard to understand what the end game is for Evan Mathis if he decides not to show up when it's mandatory. I still think he's got a foot out the door somehow, whether it's the team releasing him or him forcing them to releasing him. I would not be a fan and think that time is going to heal some wounds and Evan's going to come back and play left guard this year.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I thought that was, and he said a lot of different guys are playing the right guard spot. Who would be the favorite of the others?
My personal, you're asking me who I think is going to win right guard?
Yeah, I mean, you got Tobin, Gardner played there, because Tobin got the first shot. He was hurt. Right. You got a bunch of different guys who played. So you had, quote, a lot of different guys play there last year.
Yeah. So Jason Kelsey, today it was all Matt Tobin on first team right guard. And Kelsey told me that was just because that's today. The other day it was Andrew Gardner, and it's pretty much been a rotation of Gardner one day, Tobin the next day. So I would assume right now it's down to those two guys. And if you're asking me, I would think Matt Tobin would have the advantage. A little bit younger, an in-house guy, signed as a rookie free agent, that they were very high on, even as a rookie 2 years ago. He got hurt last year. If you remember, he had that preseason high ankle sprain, and he wasn't completely healthy. So when he finally did get in early, against San Francisco, he didn't play well. He just wasn't himself. So I do think a healthy Matt Tobin probably is the lead horse in that race. One undrafted rookie that I was told by a few scouts to really keep an eye on is the Cole Manhart kid, who I believe played at Nebraska Kearney. Or Kearney, I don't know if I pronounced that right, but apparently this is a kid who's a really good player who's just had some injuries he's had to deal with. But if we're talking about it, we might as well say, there are 4 offensive linemen that have signed, so I would keep an eye on him throughout the spring and summer. All
right, Jeff, let's look at a couple of other areas. Walter Thurman was brought in here. Now, he's had a lot of injuries. We talked on Tuesday about him being the left corner, but Chip said he could be playing some safety. Was that a surprise?
It was a little bit of a surprise. It's still unclear to me based on that press conference because Chip was asked which of the hybrid defensive backs is the first to get to start playing safety, and Chip said Walter Thurman. And so some people took that as, well, that means Walter Thurman's right now. Thurman is playing safety opposite Malcolm Jenkins for now. And others took it, well, that's just of the guys who are hybrid. So maybe when Earl Wolf is ready to come back, he assumes the spot. It's a competition. Today it looked to me like Chris Maragos was the first team safety along with Malcolm Jenkins for almost the entire practice. So it is a little surprising to see Walter move there because they do have other hybrid guys. They have Jalen Watkins. They have the Jerome Copeland. They drafted 2 corners who you thought one of them might be able to move to safety. I think right now Chip is going with experience here and seeing how the younger guys grow and develop before he makes any moves.
What about Nolan Carroll? Where were they kind of focusing in? Because some people maybe thought, all right, well, Carroll didn't really impress much as a corner. Maybe Chip's not looking at him there. Is he a guy who's a candidate for a safety slide, or is he focusing more on the corner spot with Nolan Carroll?
Yeah, it looks like corner for Nolan, and it looks like, to our surprise, that he's a real competitor for outside corner to start opposite Byron Maxwell based on what we watched today. It was basically Byron Maxwell and Nolan Carroll, first-team outside cornerbacks. And I know they like him as that dime linebacker role. You can still play that and move to it in nickel and dime situations if they want. But as of today, and based on what Nolan said about how things have gone so far, he is getting a look as the first outside corner, first-team outside corner opposite Maxwell.
Linebacker spot, Ryans, Kiko Alonso, Michael Kendricks, that's going to be something to keep an eye on, but was there any clues with the inside linebacker spot?
Well, I think just it's great to see that D'Amico Ryans is out here practicing doing everything. So first, that's wonderful for a guy coming off a second Achilles, and he tore the Achilles midway through last season. So the fact that he's out there already, and he had said he had a recovery about a month and a half ago or 2 months ago, but even to be out here pretty much doing everything, I think that's a fantastic sign for him, for the Eagles. And what we saw today was a mix. We saw at times D'Amico and Kiko as the first team inside linebackers. At times we saw D'Amico and Kendricks. At times we saw Kiko and Kendricks. So obviously this is, while all 3 are still here and on the roster, Chip is just getting them all equal amount of first team reps.
All right, Geoff Mosher's with us here, CSNPhilly.com, covering the Philadelphia Eagles OTAs. Another interesting thing is the size of DeMarco Murray. Did you get a chance for the first time really up close and personal to see how big of a man he is to play that position?
Yeah, it's weird. I actually didn't see much of DeMarco Murray today. But to your point, I remember I was right in the front row there for his press conference when he was signed, and I remember that really stood out to me. One thing about him, I feel like I'm the limb examiner today. I'm already talking about Sam Bradford's legs. The hands. DeMarco Murray's hands are his fingers are very long. In fact, he's actually had some fumble problems throughout his career, and that's probably because of the workload. But it surprised me because he has really monstrous hands, Mike. He is built like a kind of a mountain of a man for a running back, very chiseled, and that was obvious just looking at him in a suit.
Well, I'll tell you, the one thing that everybody kind of mentioned was that you wanted to get a more, because Chip Kelly rather have 2nd and 7 than 2nd and 13. He'll take the 3 yards and get back in that huddle or get back on the line and try again rather than the bouncing around. And I think when you look at DeMarco Murray, you see this is a guy that's hard to lose yards because of how big he is. So that's one definite difference between those two guys. But anything else stand out at this 3-day period at the OTAs? I know we're going to jump in real quick into the article that you wrote over at CSN Philly, but on the field stuff, anything else stand out to you?
The one thing, and I know it's a game where guys are getting smaller, but we were talking with Kiko Alonso after practice, and it was my first time to really look at him, either in uniform or warm-ups, and he's not a big, huge guy. He's the 6'4". I think he's listed at 240 or something, but it surprised me to see him. Because, you look at D'Amico Ryans, and he's got a lot of bulk to him. And even though Michael Kendricks is short, he does have a lot of bulk in the arm area and the chest area. And Kiko doesn't look that way. But that's the way the game is going, right? I mean, you're getting the smaller, lighter linebackers who fly all over the place. But if this guy is as good against the run as the 159 tackles that I guess he put up in Buffalo, that makes him really an athletic freak. Because he's not the biggest guy in the world.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, you wrote the piece over at csnphilly.com. More to the Eagles front office overhaul than meets the eye. And I know a lot of times fans kind of look at these and take them with a grain of salt, but you took a little deeper look at why this might matter. Yeah, and the person, they announced a bunch of front office additions. I guess it was a week and a half ago, Dwayne Joseph, and then they promoted Lewis Brown. But really, a guy they didn't announce, and I think there's a little bit intentional behind that, was Chris Shea, who has been in the NFL or been in football for 30 years. And he has this extremely diverse background that includes scouting, includes coaching, includes cap management, lawyering. He worked for the NFL Management Council on contract issues, advising league executives on contract structure, making sure contracts were in compliance. So he's got the contract background, and he's really known as a guy who developed a system, a model, if you will, a business model that blends all of these important things and really gets all of the factions in a NFL headquarters together: the coaching staff, the scouting staff, the analytics staff, the business staff, because they all need to work together. And, what we know is that there's not everybody working together here at the NovaCare complex. There's Chip and Ed Manowitz, and then there's Howie Roseman. And those two factions, the Chip and Ed faction, don't want to associate much with the Howie Roseman faction. Very interesting.
Chris Shea becomes a really important person because, A, he can be a go-between. He can talk Howie's language. He can talk Chip and Ed's language. And let me be clear. This guy is a scout first and foremost, and that's what he's been doing mostly for the last 16 years with the Dolphins as assistant director of pro scouting and coming up the scouting ladder. He's brought in here for that model I was telling you about and his scouting efficiency. He's not a number cruncher only, okay? He's not going to be a cap contract guy, but he can be a source, a resource that Ed and Chip can use on contracts and cap valuation and things of that nature, instead of kind of having to talk to Howie. And then if Howie were ever to leave, I think this enable them to have somebody that they can rely on to fill that role. And that's really important, especially when Chip and Ed really don't want to have to deal with Howie. So they can deal with Chris, and Chris can deal with Howie if there has to be a go-between, if you will. So I think that makes his role very important. Interesting that the Eagles didn't announce it, but he's definitely a guy with a lot of experience. And the one thing you want is front office harmony, and you're not going to get that here as long as those three guys that I mentioned are in the building. But maybe if you have enough buffers, you can make it all work out. But it is smart of Chip and Ed to at least surround themselves with a guy who has that cap experience, who has that contract experience. Because I got to admit to you, I think there were some really fishy contracts that the Eagles handed out here in free agency. I mean, Walter Thurman missed 15 games last year, $3.2 million. Miles Austin, I mean, we all know Miles Austin hasn't been relevant in 5 years, and he got $2.3 million with $1 million guaranteed. And even the money they gave to DeMarco Murray and Ryan Matthews, not all the contracts. I mean, the players themselves are important, but the contracts they signed to, they definitely don't always pass the smell test.
All right.
And there have been some people who argued whether LaShawn McCoy straight up for Kiko Alonso is even the right type of value in return. So I think, again, they arm themselves with someone who can kind of help them out in that area and just he's a cohesive guy, is what I was told about Crochet. Really cohesive, can bring everybody together.
Take a look at the full article at csnphilly.com. Follow Mosher on Twitter at Geoff Mosher, CSN. The Eagles OTAs continue on Monday. Thank you, Jeff.
You got it, Mike.